And we're live.
Good afternoon and welcome to the AIB meeting for date, which is April the 18th, 2024. We have a rather busy agenda for today, so we're going to get into it right away. Let me, first of all, apologize. I may have to leave. I will have to leave a little bit earlier today to go to a mandatory training. And our very able and capable Vice Chair Britt Kewen will over from that as I depart. So I apologize in advance for that. First of all, let's give a roll call now, Mr. Executive Director.
Yes, sir. In addition to the chair, we have Vice Chair Kerwin and board members Manco, Robinson, Doss, Lynch, and Stapleton. So all are present, and we have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you. The first item for us is the adoption of the meeting summary. The last meeting, everyone has an opportunity to look at it, to see whether or not are there any changes, additions to it, so forth.
I move approval, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, the second to the motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, moved and properly second for approval of the meeting summary. Any question, discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? Hearing none, the meeting summaries are in fact approved. Let's now go to the revisions for the agenda. Are there any changes? Hope everyone has an opportunity to look at the agenda for today. Okay. I see none of our hands indication of changes, alterations. Not, I'll take that as a acceptance, and we'll go directly to the public comments. And we have several people here for comments today. Let me pronounce the names. I think it's Alexandra Mueller from First Tyrant Advisor, Angelica Jackson from Phoenix International Incorporated, Yilmaz Ak from Chesapeake Lighthouse Foundation. I'll take that as I'm sorry. And we have
Yes.
written testimony from the College Park Academy. So is Alexander here to proceed?
Yes, he is.
Okay. The floor is yours.
And when you say, and this is Alex Muller, that's who's up right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Alrighty. So my name is Alex Muller. I work with First Tryant Advisors. We're SEC and MSRB registered municipal advisors. We've worked in over 30 states, but primarily we focus on charter schools and independent schools, particularly in the state of Maryland. We've done dozens and dozens of financings from tax and bonds, bank loans, et cetera. And really my purpose today is to kind of talk about the effects of the revenue, potential revenue cuts on charter schools. To kind of zoom out, charter school defaults are incredibly rare nationwide. According to a 2022 EFF study, only about 1.6% of issued debt for a charter school has ever defaulted, and about 95% of that has recovered. Maryland is actually one of 17 states that have never had a charter school default, and for states that have issued charter school debt. And that actually is a huge boost when you look at the availability and rates that you can get credit offered at. Now, why did charter schools default? Almost in this study, we looked at everything from poor governance to subpar academic results, mismanaging special education dollars, things like that. I couldn't find any precedent of a major change to state policy causing a default. So again, this would kind of be a first there. Now, how does a default occur? One of the main ways, the number one covenant we have put in place from both banks and public bond investors is what's called a debt service coverage ratio, which is essentially that charter schools and other type entities pledge to have a certain amount of revenues in excess of the debt service. I crunched some numbers, and to give you an example, a school of 650 kids with revenues of 10 million, be about a little over 15,000 per student, would typically, what we see has a coverage of 1.33 on the debt. So if it's $1 million payment, you're generating cash flows, including that debt service payment of 1.33. $1,330,000, roughly a margin of 5% at the end of the day, revenues minus expenses. With a proposed 25% hit to that revenue, that means that you're instantly can't make that payment. You're in the negative. At 2.1 coverage, you can't make the payment. You're in the negative. At 2.8 coverage, a 27% margin, you can barely make the payment. And even then, you'd be in a soft default. Essentially, when I ran the numbers, any charter school in Maryland that would hope to survive the passage of this rule would have to be making a 28.75% margin of revenues over expenditures, which doesn't exist. Like there's almost no charter school out there that can do that. The immediate impact is schools, across the state would close. They would default on their debt. Tens of thousands of students have to get absorbed back into the school system. The largest holders of Maryland charter school debt are actually community banks, like Eagle Bank and Bethesda and other pension funds. They get wiped out on that. And obviously the long-term effects is there's a massive chilling effect and lending into the state, and that trickles into everything from education, transportation, sports revenue bonds, utility bonds. The state essentially gets in a blacklist because you can't take $160 million defaulted in public bonds and expect to continue to receive lending into the state. It just doesn't happen. I think that's about the end of my time, but I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Alexander. I think we have your testimony. And any questions? I see none. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good one.
Angelica Jackson.
Good afternoon, members of the AIB. I'm glad to be here with you all today. My name is Angelica Jackson. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of Phoenix International School of the Arts, which is Charles County's first public charter school. We serve middle school grades, and we have a strong focus on arts education and arts integration. I was compelled to provide a testimony today because of the structuring of the blueprint funding to all schools, which includes public charter schools, particularly around the 75%, 25% split. We are almost receiving a 10% cut in our budget for next year. While Charles County is not withholding at the 25%, they are now withholding at 17%. It is still impacting us gravely. And not just public charter schools, it's impacting the traditional public schools as well. And so I am here to say, for those new startup schools, please don't forget about us. Because with 10% cut in our budget, we are almost inoperable. However, there is great need for schools like ours, particularly in those areas like Charles County that are more rural and suburban areas. We have over 900 young families and community members on our waiting list, and it just shows that there's demand. Before the blueprint, districts were already withholding less per pupil from public charter schools, that 2% administrative fee. And as you all hear today, under the new framework with the blueprint, we are now being withheld additional funding. And with that funding being withheld, we still are not completely sure how that funding will be used by the district. And so we don't have a clear line of sight into resource allocation. Yes, we will receive individual student per student allotment. However, we don't know what that 17% in our case is going to be used for and how we can ensure that we are receiving the services that our students need and that support by the district. And I would say ultimately, there is a threat to our viability with our authorizing bodies, our LEAs, withholding almost 25% of our funding. As startup public charter school, we cannot sustain. It is very difficult to sustain. And so I'm currently faced with having to reach out to community, reach out to families, reach out to those who see public charter schools as an engine for equity, as a place for hope for their scholars who learn differently, to say, if we don't receive our full funding, we cannot maintain. And again, we are the only public charter school in Charles County. So the implications of these funding disparities are dire. Startup charter schools, which often serve as beacons of innovation, are being stifled by this system, this new structure. There are unique needs that we have. Of course, you all are familiar with startup businesses. There are often additional costs for public charter schools who are under 10 years old that we have to pay up out front and then pay back. And we are unable to do that with the current structure of the Blueprint funding. And I envision the future of education in Maryland to include equity, fairness, inclusivity. And in order to do that, we must ensure that all public schools, including public charter schools and those in the more harder to reach areas like Charles County, that's the Cobb Islands, the Nanjamoys, the Indian Head, that they receive equitable funding and support to fulfill our mission. So I do urge you all to reconsider the funding structure, or at least speak to the school district leaders to ensure that they are considering the unique challenges of startup public charter schools and the unique challenges of traditional public schools now having to manage more of their funds at the site, to ensure that they are considering how we can really be sustainable and continue on. And that's all that I would like to share with you all today. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about my experience with Blueprint so far.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jackson. Are there any questions? Ms. Seeing none? Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Yamaz Ark, I think that's right, Chesapeake Lighthouse Foundation.
Correct. I'll start right away. Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Yilmaz Ak, and I serve as the CEO of the Chesapeake Lighthouse Foundation, which operates 7 highly regarded and academically successful public charter schools in 2 counties. Today, I bring before you an urgent concern regarding the impact of Blueprint on the public charter school community, a community that educates over 25,000 students across 50 schools in the state. While the Blueprint's intent to allocate additional funding to support farm students, EL, and special education students is commendable, it inadvertently places a severe financial strain on Maryland's charter schools. Unlike district schools, charter schools receive no capital funding and typically allocate 15% of their budgets to facility costs alone. The Blueprint's shift, allowing school districts to withhold 25% of funding compared to the previous cap of 2%, compounds this challenge significantly. Chesapeake Science Point, a charter school under our foundation in Anne Arundel County, not only holds a 5-star rating, but also has been recognized as the best charter school in the state and the top high school and the top middle school in Anne Arundel County. Despite these accolades and serving a significant population of minority students, it faces 12% cut in funding. Our charter schools in Prince George's County are experiencing similar cuts. CMIT South, which is cut by 12%, has over 90% minority enrollment. The depth of these cuts is unprecedented, even surpassing those experienced during the 2008 recession. To provide further context, Prince George's County's operational budget is $2.8 billion. With 125,000 students enrolled, the county has over $22,000 of per pupil allocation. Charter schools this past year received $14,000 per pupil. However, with Blueprint, Prince George's per pupil allocation for charter schools will decrease to $12,000 roughly. $2,000 of that money goes towards facilities, so the school is left with only $10,000 for their operational and instructional costs. This drastic reduction in funding is with a 5% district withholding. If the district were to withhold 25% as allowed by the Blueprint, per pupil funding would actually be under $10,000 in Prince George's County. I urge the board to consider the unique financial models of charter schools and the diverse demographics we serve. We are faced with unintended consequences that need immediate attention. We recommend that there be funding guidance developed and provided to our districts to ensure equitable treatment of all educational entities, including Maryland charter schools and especially schools serving high-need communities. We are committed to working with the board to find sustainable solutions that will support all Maryland students. Thank you for your attention and for considering our perspective in your ongoing efforts to refine and implement a blueprint for Maryland's future. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of Mr. R?
Thank you.
Thank you, Garcia. Thank you. One of the questions we may have, and I think we have to get some legal advice from our counsel, is the authority of the blueprint as it relates to this particular matter. I don't want to comment further on that until we get some advice, but my general understanding was that this matter was basically before the MSDE, and that's where the decision making is. Am I correct about that initially, Ms. Heiss?
Yes, that is correct. The State Board of Education issued an opinion that that affects charter schools.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much. Okay, we're ready to go to the third item on our agenda for today, which is focus group for today, which is Pillar 3, College and Career Readiness. And would you take over from there and introduce who's going to lead that discussion, Ms. Heiss?
Yes, so I'm going to turn it over to our policy director, Rachel Amstutz, and also Member Doss, who is the liaison to Pillar 3.
Great, thank you very much. We have a few quick slides to share with you, and I'll also ask Libby Diamond to join, our policy analyst for Pillar 3. And yep, perfect. There we go. So we're excited today to bring updates for Pillar 3. And as you know, Pillar 3 is quite expansive. So to be able to drill down and narrow our focus is a little tricky because so much work is happening around this pillar. On the next slide, we provide an overview of the Yep, perfect. Thank you. An overview of the focus area, college and career readiness, and our broad goal that students must graduate high school with the knowledge and skills required to be successful as they enter college or begin their careers. The pillar goals at the bottom, we just showed you what's there. We don't expect that you can read that tiny print, but basically in the blueprint, in our comprehensive plan for the blueprint, it's packed with goals for Pillar 3, and they are all taken directly from the blueprint, and it begins with our younger students in 3rd grade, making sure that students are on track at an early age with a focus on early intervention, targeted supports, and monitoring of on-track students to know if our strategies are working. Expecting increases in CCR in math and in English language arts across all student groups, as well as participation in and completion of post-CCR pathways, obtaining college credits while still in high school, even with the possibility of earning an associate's degree, and then as well as CTE and industry recognized credentials. On the next slide, just to remind everybody that there was some big an adoption of the new college and career readiness standard back in January. We have that here on the slide just to show what the shifts were in January, to remind everybody that we now have a newly adopted standard. On the next slide, we wanted to bring you some fast facts again, what we're calling our blueprint in action, to give you some overviews of what's been happening and what we're seeing on the field in this work. From the AIB staff perspective, we've been deeply involved with our career counseling initiative. So we wanted to take a minute to highlight that for you. And then in just a few moments, we'll turn it over to members of the advisory committee who will share with you about their work around Pillar 3 as well. So with career counseling, as you know, the blueprint requires that all middle and high school students, grades 6 through 12, are provided with individualized career counseling to inform their post-CCR choices. And this has been year 1 of our the collaboration that we've seen between our local workforce boards, our community colleges and our local school systems to design their strategy with a goal of maximizing the local resources that each of those agencies bring to the work, and that it aligns to the local workforce demand in their particular county. We do want to note that the colleges and the workforce boards are definitely key partners in the design and the delivery of the career awareness exploration activities and experiences. To date, we have about 330 career counselors hired across the state. We'll have a final number very soon. Essentially, our team has been working for the past month on meeting with each of the agencies involved for each district to hear updates on how the county is approaching career counseling, what successes they've had, what challenges they've had, what they need, and really identifying questions that they needed to have answered as we're closing out year one or getting close to the end of year one. Those check-in meetings have been fabulous and enlightening. We've really been impressed by broadly the collaboration between the three agencies and the ability to stand up a partnership that is legal, right? There's like the MOU guiding it, but then there's just this overall commitment that we're hearing from all three agencies to lean into this and to be creative, to take the opportunity to think about it in context of their local district. So we have one more check-in left, and then we'll be compiling our notes to share out with everybody what we heard. And then this actually led us to the idea that what we were hearing in the debrief probably needed to be shared more broadly. So we're going to be implementing in June, some type of a virtual convening to bring together all of those partners who've been involved in standing up career counseling this year to be able to hear from each other. So it's been very exciting work. And the next phase of the work that our team is involved in is developing the template that each LEA needs to complete, or each partnership, each MOU group needs to complete, that is due to us by June 30th. So we aim to have that out to them very soon. This year's reporting template will be a little bit different than what's to come in the future. As you know, the CTE committee will be tracking and documenting the 3-year progress with this initiative and identifying best practice across the state. This year, for our purposes, we're looking at implementation data. How many college career counselors did they hire? What's the budget looking like? How are they planning for and tracking, connecting with students, all of that. So each district will be submitting a report to us June 30th. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, and I actually can take any questions on career counseling if there are any before we switch to dual enrollment.
I have a real quick question. I mean, on the one hand, it's good to see that there were 330 career counselors hired, but that's only like 13 or 14 counselors per district. And there are thousands of students in a district. And I'm assuming that the career counseling isn't kind of a one-off, one-time while you're in middle and high school. So what kind of workforce are we going to need with this career counseling so that we can ensure the students are getting the kind of personalized counseling that the blueprint calls for?
That is a great question. We've been meeting with each of the groups. We've been tracking numbers of hired as well as what's left to fill. So some of the districts hired right away, and they had career counselors in schools the first week of school. Some are still hiring. I would say that 330 is getting pretty close to hired, that we've got the vast majority hired. One of the questions that we're encountering as we're talking to the districts is about their staffing model. And we've begun looking at that a little bit more closely now that we see where they are with this. Many of them are putting one career counselor in a high school. So across Maryland, that's very diverse. That might mean 800, that might mean 3,000. That can look very, very different. So we plan to drill down on that as we move into our data analysis once we get the numbers fully. And we've been talking with local workforce board partners and our LEAs to make sure that that's going to be enough to reach the individualized goal. We've also been talking about the model, and a few districts have taken a really neat approach to say that one career counselor obviously can't meet with 3,000 students in a meaningful way. They might
Right.
be able to do it compliance wise, like, yes, I saw that person for 2 minutes and I know this, but in
Right.
a meaningful way, some of those districts are making it a team approach, that the school counselor does have a role in this, the career counselor does, the teachers do. What they're wrapping their heads around right now is, what does the student's individualized plan look like, and what does it include, and how often are they checking in on that? We've had some requests for a statewide plan, and we've been talking with our partners at MSDE about that as well. But I would say your question is our question as well. And as we are digging into year one and seeing how funds were used to stand up the program, we really are urging everybody to make sure that the funds are doing the intended outcome, that they're making it possible to have trained and knowledgeable people who know career counseling, know the local workforce, and know the options students can take, that's where the bulk of the money is going, so that we have enough people reaching our students.
Thank you.
Yes, and we'll have more to share about that after we get the June 30th reports, and as we talk with the each of the groups about thinking about next year and beyond.
Good.
So for dual enrollment, we have some numbers on the slides here that are pretty exciting. For fiscal year 23, last year's data, we have it broken down by 11th and 12th graders. So 4,567 students took 8,853 dual enrollment classes in 11th grade, which translates to just under 2 classes per student. And in 12th grade, we had 8,965 12th graders took.
Is that for year? That's two for a semester.
I believe that's for the school year. Yes,
Okay.
for the school year,
Cool.
that number of 11th graders took that number of classes.
Thank you.
Okay, and for 12th graders, 8,965 took 20,710 classes, which averaged to be about 2.31 courses taken by 12th graders in school year 23. So we're excited to watch this trend as the data rolls in for this school year, and as we're getting more of this effort underway and just seeing what our students are doing. We did get some data too around in certain counties. We don't have it for every county yet, but like the pass rate of courses, or the fail rate, actually, the fail rate is pretty low, like it's very low. So our students are doing well in these courses, and we're seeing that there are some good systems and structures set up to ensure that we're monitoring and tracking students and supporting as they are taking these college courses, which feel a little bit different than what they're used to in high school. So this is some early data that we have on this, and we're eager to get more for next year. Any questions about dual enrollment? Okay.
I think there'll be some later discussion with the executive director for discussion about how this fits into the overall plan going forward. So these numbers are likely to change with many of the decisions that which you'll have to make that could very well impact it. So, but thank you for this portion of it.
Absolutely. On the next slide, we have a little sneak peek of what's coming up around Pillar 3. Our LEA partners are developing their pre-K to 12 literacy plans, and those are due in late June. They're also drafting their pre-K 5 math plans, due in the middle of September. We are excited to be hosting a virtual convening focused on Pillar 3 with school principals around Maryland next Thursday evening. with Dr. Kerwin being our keynote speaker. I'm excited to say that we put this out just about a day and a half ago, and we already have 140 principals signed up for this. So the registration and enrollment for this has been flying in, and people are excited to have this opportunity to connect with the AIB and especially to hear from Dr. Kerwin. The AIB and MSDE are developing guidance on post-CCR pathways to share with our LEA partners. And the CTE committee is very busy working on adopting some frameworks for CTE and apprenticeships and other industry recognized credentials. And then I mentioned earlier, the AIB is planning a career counseling end of the year event to share year one implementation progress and ideas, and just to build the energy around what's happening. We had a convening in February, but this will be a little bit more summative as year one has gone on and as they're starting to put together their plans for year two. Many of our districts will need to revise their MOUs that they submitted last year and you approved. Some of them put some very specific things in that were numbers for year one, and they need to revise them with year two. And others recognized as they hit the ground with their plan that their plan needed to change. Their approach was not exactly going to work as planned, and they've needed to make some shifts. So we anticipate some MOUs being revised and shared with us this summer. With that, we can go to the next slide. Okay, our Pillar 3 Advisory Committee has been hard at work for 2 years, and they have been committed to digging in to the many areas of their pillar. And I'm excited to turn it over to Dr. Doss to introduce our 3 guest speakers and share about their work.
Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. You all are doing so much work. It is so appreciated. I have the great pleasure to introduce the representatives from the Pillar 3 Advisory Committee. The Pillar 3 Committee, they hit the ground running with Dave Harper and Olivia Pearson's leadership. And the team employs their knowledge and their expertise strategically to encompass all of Pillar 3, which you see in and of itself with Rachel's introduction that this is a heavy lift. Pillar 3 is far and wide and top to bottom and all around out of all of the pillars. The advisory committee continues to engage diverse stakeholders. They work collaboratively with the Governor's Workforce Development Board, CTE committee. They bring in MSDE representatives into their meetings. They work with the LEAs, community colleges, the workforce boards, and on and on. Their work really demonstrates a commitment to the success of the blueprint implementation. And these folks, they work full-time. This is not their full-time job. But they, again, they really exemplify that the blueprint implementation and what we need to do and who we need to engage and giving us advice. And I could just go on and on and on and on, but I'm not. Thank you for all that you do. And I want to turn the floor over to the leaders of the advisory committee for Pillar 3. And, Board Member Robinson, I will say that Pillar 3 Advisory Committee is the #1 advisory committee. Do you have anything to say about that?
I'm gonna let y'all have it today. But we all know the truth. Well, I'm gonna let y'all have it today.
All right. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Olivia Pearson, and I am joined by other members of our committee. So I am the chair, and the co-chair, I'll let him introduce himself, as well as our workforce representative.
Thank you, Olivia. Dave Harper joining from Maryland's Eastern Shore, where I work at Chesapeake College. We serve 5 counties, and I really appreciate your time and your guidance in this good effort.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kirkland Murray. I am the local workforce development director for Anne Arundel County, Maryland, but I also represent the Maryland Workforce Association, which is the 13th association of the 13 workforce boards throughout Maryland. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you all. Thank you for your leadership on this. And we'll be happy to discuss how we're doing and answer any questions you may have.
Absolutely. I'm not sure who's controlling the slides, but if we could get the next slide, that would be great. So our committee has really tried to take a strategic approach on addressing the portions of the blueprint. And so this year, each month, our meetings tackle another topic that's very relevant to what everyone is working on across the partnerships. And also, if we need to insert an additional meeting or two in, we do, to make sure that we are providing timely feedback to address the open comment for things like the IRC definition, or as we're working with career counseling, any feedback that we're able to provide, we do. And we have diverse guests that are invited. And so our MSDE representatives, as well as our CTE representatives, CTE committee, are standing ad hoc members, we like to call them. And so they're invited to every meeting. And then depending on the topic, we also invite other members who we think can lend to a robust discussion on our different topics, as well as we want to make sure we are encompassing the voice of the folks that are doing the work and implementation to make sure that, we are looking and addressing areas that need to be addressed.
Thank you, Olivia. Really well said. It's been a privilege for us. We're trying to facilitate the good work of the AIB and the CTE committee in making high school more than it was, frankly, when I was in high school. And you can graduate with a diploma and an industry recognized credential and an apprenticeship and 60 credits in your back pocket. So there's so many details involved that when AIB and CTE committee, for example, are making decisions, we just want to leverage the connections we have at community colleges or workforce boards or K-12 LEAs to help those decisions be as informed as possible. And so that's why we've tried to time our topics with feedback periods for public comment, or to time them. In this case, you see, for example, each of the pathways for early college, or for CTE, or for support, or for Cambridge and APIB. We dedicate a whole month to that discussion and looking at models that can make them successful, best practices that are bubbling up throughout the state, so we can share the data and we can share the information so that we can kind of consolidate that down and provide it in what we hope is a helpful form to our partners in AIB and CTE committee.
Thank you. Can we get one more slide too, because that will show kind of where we are going for the rest of the year. Thank you.
What you see reflected in the guest list is that we found Blueprint to be a bridge builder. Just think about the MSDE and MHEC collaboration right now on guidance that's happening and drawing closer, and the workforce board, community college, LEA MOUs, so that not only can high school be more than it was when I was in high school, but business and industries can see that real meaningful collaboration with education. And I wonder if my colleague Kirkland Murray can share a bit about what he's seeing there.
So thank you. First of all, I do want to thank Olivia and Dave for their leadership of this committee. This has been, a very important part of the implementation of career counseling, college and career counseling. As someone who not only sits on this committee, but knee deep in it with hiring 30-some career coaches in Anne Arundel County. In Anne Arundel County, we started in the middle schools and this year in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. having all of our career coaches. I think Dr. Kerwin's question was a very good question. Are you going to have the capacity to continue to have enough career coaches, especially as we move into the high schools? So we're planning to move into the high schools this year, and continuing doing the great work that we're doing that we started in middle schools. So we started in the middle schools with really focusing a lot on that emotional intelligence and linking it to careers. So, really helping students to really understand their aptitudes, their abilities, their strengths, and their interests. And then continue that with then connecting those to different careers through career exploration and exposing them to different opportunities through guest speakers, through lessons in the classrooms, and then just working one-on-one with our career coaches in those grades. And the same thing in the 8th grade, we really focus a lot on those soft skills, those essential skills that employers really want. So it's been a very interesting year to implement this. I think that my colleagues, the other workforce boards working in partnership with the LEAs and the community colleges, local control, we're all doing it a little bit different, but we all have the same goal in making sure that we're providing that meaningful experience for students to really help them to not only understand themselves, but help them to really pick a career that they're going to be successful in, that they're really going to be interested in. And then mirroring that career to not only their soft skills and hands-on experience, but also making sure it aligns to the courses that they're taking in school.
I love that you said local control, and that's one of the things that we really advocated for example, some flexibility in the IRC approvals at the local level, because the regional economies of Maryland differ. And for the community colleges and the CTE programs to be well aligned through their program advisory councils and to make sure that the kind of credentials that they're training students on get them jobs locally, get them good opportunities. And another thing we're working on is in rural areas, how can you maximize the number of businesses available and placements available for apprenticeship? And for us, it's about maximizing resources, because if we partner well, community colleges, for example, can help add capacity to the credentialing. The workforce boards can bring wisdom in terms of how we target our programs and our CTE programs and credentials. So it's been helpful to have these bridge building conversations. Thank you for the opportunity.
One other add-on is, I think this year we were strategic to focus on the secondary piece and a lot of the post-CCR pathways. We've already started having initial discussions as we plan out topics for next year, really reaching back to the earlier grades and that portion of Pillar 3 to make sure that we are tying in what's going on in the elementary and middle schools, as well as the supports that are happening prior to the post-CCR pathway with additional supports, but what's going on as the students progress from elementary through middle school to high school.
Ms. Pearson? Just a question.
Yeah.
It's on the career side of this that there's some uneasiness that I've found in talking to people around the state, that we need to do some work on fully explaining what those career options are, because there's still a disproportion of people who believe that that's less than having the college portion of the career and college ready. So there's some reluctance, I think, among parents and others about how we, in fact, market that and ensure that students are properly aware and the parents are aware. So there may be some help that we need to try to fully embrace that issue, because there is some level of reluctance, I think, that we're going to have initially, I believe, about whether or not that's a good path for their students. I know traditionally here in Montgomery County, we've had over the past, some strong pushbacks from parents who four-year colleges are simply the only thing that they're thinking about their kids, and not taking advantage, even if we had the programs available, that's something they would pursue. So maybe once you guys may want to try to look at that as an issue or a challenge that we need to get through as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We have experienced the same type of feedback.
Right.
And so we have started to talk about that, but we're hoping that career counseling can really help frame the discussion as it relates to everyone's gonna have to choose a career. And so college can be a pathway to a career, and there are also other pathways and multiple pathways. And so I absolutely agree. I think there's a lot more work to do as it relates to the messaging around those pieces. Kirk, did you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you, Olivia. So it's very important that parents are involved in this whole college and career readiness piece of it and really sharing information with parents so that they really understand that there is a pathway besides college for their students, a well-paid pathway. I mean, this is why I'm very excited the fact that Blueprint did talk about apprenticeships and those opportunities and also clarifying with parents that apprenticeships, not all apprenticeships are in the trades. We're talking in Anne Arundel County, we are working hand in hand with the Anne Arundel County Public School to create apprenticeship programs in non-traditional industries in healthcare, IT, warehouse, transportation, logistics, hospitality. So, and all of these would lead to pathways to family sustained wage jobs, good jobs. And then again, as we all know, the benefit of apprenticeships, you have that, but you don't necessarily have the college debt. So I agree with you, sir, that it's very important that we bring the parents into this. And part of our job is to educate the parents on this, not just the students, but also the education. So a good college and career counseling program really has two audiences. It's the students and helping them to prepare to go in a career, but also educating the parents. And this is one of the reasons why the local workforce boards were brought into this. I mean, we work closely with parents too. One of the things that we've seen in Anne Arundel County that when we start talking to the kids, then we start getting reach out from the parents to help them to get better jobs and things like that. So you are 100% correct, sir. We really have to focus on making sure that we're educating the parents too.
Thank you. Are there any other questions we can identify at this point?
I do have.
Sure, I'm sorry.
I do have a question. Thank you. Oh, and I just wanted to note that I see that you all are representing the community college, the high school, and the workforce. Okay, very strategic. But my question is, when we at the beginning and Rachel highlighted the dual enrollment increases, and I was wondering, are we seeing any increases at the same rate with AP courses, or what are the numbers telling us?
That is a great question. I don't believe I have any data on AP courses at my fingertips, but I can certainly get it.
And then just some on the ground knowledge from our community college and high school. Olivia and Dave, have you seen any changes?
I can speak a little bit from an LEA perspective because I am in Prince George's County, and I think that's a constant dialogue and communication because ideally AP and dual enrollment can work hand in hand. I think that there's also an educational perspective on how to do that and how to best maximize both AP and dual enrollment. So that's an ongoing conversation with, again, teachers and the schools as well as the parents and the students.
We actually had a conference with our faculty and local LEA faculty yesterday, Zoom, and the question came up, and AP has been, in some cases, an on-ramp to dual enrollment in our 5 county LEAs. We certainly have seen an increase from about 31% of our enrollment being in dual to around 34% of our enrollment being in dual enrollment. So we have seen that, and those increases have been throughout the state. Community colleges have generally seen an increase. And, just on the trade side, Queen Anne's County to our west usually had around 20 interested welders. This career coaching thing is working. They've got twice that. They've got beyond their capacity. They're asking us if they might use our lab during the day when it's idling, because our classes tend to be evenings and weekends for working adults. And we're working with them on that. Similarly, although I don't think it'll count for blueprint numbers, Dorchester County had twice as many CNA students requesting. And so after they graduate, we're going to run a class special for Dorchester County. And it's going to be just after graduation, so I don't think it quite counts, but it's because of that expanded career coaching awareness. There's more demand, and we're trying to help fill that capacity.
Thank you. Are there any further questions?
Just one clarification, Mr. Harper. You were saying those CNA positions wouldn't count for the blueprint because of timeline, or is it? Can you just clarify that?
I think it's a win for blueprint,
Sure.
but I just read in the language that's by graduation. So these students will have graduated. So they'll be high school graduates with diplomas. That there wasn't capacity for them to get the CNA certification, but we've been able to help them. It just happens to be just post-graduation in this case.
Yes.
I would love to take a minute to just really thank and celebrate the work of Olivia and Dave and Kirk and the entire team. They have been meeting on a very robust schedule, and every meeting is quite full with a ton of stakeholder feedback. So it's been a joy to collaborate with you, and we really appreciate the partnerships and the conversations that you're generating.
I just want to add my appreciation too. I mean, you all are doing this as volunteers, and it's so very helpful to us as we follow through on the implementation of the blueprint. So getting your counsel and wisdom makes a real difference, and you just need to know you are appreciated.
Thank you so very much. Okay, Ms. Heights, I think it's your time to take over for the executive director's report, unless there's something else from Pillar 3.
Thank you all for your leadership.
Thank you all. Really appreciate you. Okay. So if we can turn to the executive director report. The first item is the LEA Blueprint Implementation Plans update. And for that, I'm going to ask Emma Pellerin, our Implementation Plan Director, to provide an update.
Okay, thank you so much. So as you all know, from our last meeting, we have received all 24 LEA implementation plans for the March 15th submission, and have been reviewing those since they were submitted. That is the response to the system-wide implementation plan prompt, and are very close to having feedback that will be coming from MSD and AIB, joint feedback to the LEAs, and are looking forward to getting that out very soon. And that process has gone very well. And yes, we're getting very close to finishing that up for the first round of feedback on those March 15th submissions. And then we are preparing for the review of the May 1st submissions as well. So that will be coming up in a couple of weeks, and that is the remaining 23, the responses to the remaining 23 questions in the LEA Blueprint Implementation Plan Guide. So we're preparing to review those very soon, and looking forward to continuing this process collaboratively. Any questions at all?
Are the state plans?
Yes.
Go ahead, Emma.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that's later on in the agenda as well, the criteria for success for the state agency guides. But we have been meeting with state agencies that are scheduled to submit implementation plans on June 15th. And we have been creating guides and are drafting guides, and we'll have those out very soon to help assist with their implementation plan submission. but we have been meeting with state agencies, staff to discuss their implementation plan submissions for June 15th as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions on the implementation plans? Okay, the next item, which is a good segue, is an update on the phase 1 and phase 2 technical assistance that the AIB is supporting. And for phase 1, as you know, the AIB has been supporting strategic facilitators to work with our school systems and the CTE committee as they are working to develop their implementation plans and to really help them think sort of strategically and innovatively as they're developing these plans. And in the part 1 submissions that were received March 15th, as a reminder, that first question, it's a series of questions, but it's very much focused on how the LEAs are thinking strategically throughout the district and across pillars in implementing the blueprint and identifying what the biggest challenges are in implementing the blueprint and how they can overcome those. And so we've been pleased to see that that there's some evidence that the strategic facilitators in their work with the districts has really had an impact on what they submitted in their part 1 plans. So we are feeling very positive about the value add that the strategic facilitators and the phase 1 grants are providing. And so as part of phase 2, there's sort of multiple parts to the phase 2 technical assistance. One piece of it is the school systems and the CTE committee have the option to ask to continue working with their strategic facilitator. And then in addition, they have the option to request more targeted technical assistance related to resource allocation, pre-K expansion, CCR pathways, and those are the big topics, and the career ladder, of course. And those are the big topics that the school systems have identified and that we have also identified as where school systems are having the most challenges in implementing those provisions. And so we received, so for phase 2, which will begin in the upcoming fiscal year, we put out a grant notice to accept applications for those who would like to be, what we're calling strategic partners that have expertise in one or more of those specific topics that I just listed. And we received over 50 applications for that work and are in the process of reviewing their materials and interviewing them. And by the end of this month, we will be providing a list of approved strategic partners for each of the topic areas. And then the school systems will have the opportunity to review that list, to review their application materials and even talk with them. And then by May 15th, we're asking the LEAs to submit what's called an intent to participate, where they will identify whether they would like to continue working with their strategic facilitator and whether they would like to participate in any of this other targeted technical assistance. So that is due May 15th. And then we will go through the process of matching the LEAs with strategic partners, as well as considering whether to continue funding the work with their strategic facilitator. So that work will happen in the latter part of May, early June, so that we can get all of the grants finalized before the end of the fiscal year. So that's where we are with the process. We're very very pleased at the response to the grant notice. So and we've got some very well qualified experts who are interested in working with the AIB and our school systems. So are there any questions about that?
I don't see any.
Okay. The next item is an update on the expert review teams and the literacy expert teams. And for the expert review teams, those teams, the MSTE expert review teams have been out in the schools since November, performing some of these visits. And I believe the last that I heard, because of some weather issues and also the testing when schools were testing, that they still had a couple of schools that they were going to be visiting this month, that they may have already completed those. And then they've been posting the reports, I should say, on those visits on the MSTE website. I think 10 have been posted so far. As a reminder, there are 50 visits happening this year for those expert review teams. We will, if it's not already there will be a link on the AIB's website under the resources tab that will link to those reports as well, so that everyone has access to those reports. The literacy teams have also been out into the schools, all elementary schools around the state. Those visits have begun. And in addition, so there are sort of two teams. There are the teams that are actually making the visits in the schools and observing the instruction through the teachers and instructional coaches. And then there's a separate team that is reviewing the draft literacy plans that the LEAs have developed for initially for pre-K grades, pre-kindergarten through 5, and then 6 through 12. And the school systems have received feedback on their draft plans, and they have the opportunity to revise them and resubmit them to the team at Mile to provide additional feedback as they prepare to submit their final literacy plans. Pre-K-12 literacy plans are due at the end of June. So all of that is proceeding, and MSTE is also in the process of beginning a community of practice, a statewide community of practice for instructional coaches in literacy. Those are going to start happening soon. And as we move into the next school year, we're going to continue this focus on literacy, and then we're also going to pivot to math sort of, I think it's adolescent math. Did I get that term right? I might not have. Elementary, it's like upper elementary, whatever you want to call that. Upper elementary math is going to be the next focus, and the school systems do have early adolescent, thank you. The LEAs do have a math plan that they're also working on. And MSDE has been working on developing a rubric for those plans to help the LEAs in writing those plans. The draft math plan is due in September of 2024, in the fall. And then they'll have the rest of the year to finalize their math plan. Are there any questions about that, Dr. Kerwin?
Yes. 2 questions. First of all, will we have the benefit of input from the Mile experts as we are reviewing the literacy plans?
After they've submitted their final
Yes.
that is a good question. I will follow up on that.
Okay. I think that would, speaking personally, that I think that would be very helpful. Secondly, with literacy, we've had the great benefit of experts from Mile assessing these plans. How will we assess the math plans? I mean, do we have any expertise to draw upon that will help with that kind of the assessment of those plans?
Another excellent question. I think that we are in the process of trying to identify those experts in state that might be available. I think we have a couple of potentials. And then in addition, there is some expertise, as you know, as part of the launch years initiative that I think we might be able to.
Right. I was going to mention that. I mean, there's this national figure by the name of Ted Coe, that's his name.
Yes.
Who was very involved in he'd been involved nationally on standards and worked for Achieve, I think, at one time, and so on and so forth. And he's working with our launch years group, as you know well. So maybe there's some way to draw upon that kind of expertise to give us some guidance on the quality of these plans.
Great. Any other questions? Okay. The next item is an update on the plan metrics alignment. So I will provide sort of a pretty high level overview, and if you have some questions, I will ask Ms. Pellerin to join. But essentially, AIB and MSDE staff have been meeting weekly to work on aligning the metrics or outcome measures that the AIB has identified in the comprehensive plan, the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan, the metrics that MSDE has identified in their strategic plan, and then we also have the governor's key performance indicators. So we've been, I think, making really good progress in terms of agreeing on how we can align around the different types of outcomes to agree on a standard set, a definition of the metric that we're using, and in some cases multiple metrics. And then so I think we've made really good progress on that front, and what we are in the process of doing right now is working on developing draft targets for consideration in terms of what the expectations will be for at the statewide level and at the LEA level for the progress in meeting the outcomes that we're looking for. And so we're slowly but surely making our way through the metrics. The plan, we have lots of plans. The plan is to develop a proposal, potentially a set of options, if we don't have consensus around one option, that we would bring to the outcome measures work group in May, as well as MSDE. The State Board of Education has a subcommittee that would consider the draft proposal, essentially, that so that we can get feedback and input on the work that we've done so far, with the goal of bringing a set of targets to both boards for approval at the joint board meeting at the end of June. So that's sort of where we're at and where we're trying to get to. Dr. Stapleton.
Yeah, I just had a question. From our last joint board meeting, I brought up the visual in my mind of this Venn diagram of competing measures where there was some overlap in the middle. So I'm getting the sense that those circles are now aligning more on top of each other. Are there any unique measures that it seems like it's going to have to kind of stay non-totally overlapping, where MSDE really needs this one measure that's not part of our group? So that's the first question. Second is there anybody from the governor's office who is chiming in on, you're getting feedback on with working with?
So I'll take the second one and I'll let Emma take the first one. So the governor's office, the governor has a chief performance officer who is overseeing the work around the key performance indicators. And we have been in contact with that office as we've been discussing or developing revised metrics. We have, wherever possible, we've tried to stay aligned with what the governor's office has already developed. And so that's sort of our goal. But I think we do have a few places where there would need to be just like some refinement in the definition of what is being collected and measured. Emma?
Yep. Yeah, so to the first question, the measures that we, as you recall, identified as being aligned or, being reflected in both the strategic plan and the Maryland strategic plan, the AIB comprehensive plan, and the governor's KPIs, we've come together and we've aligned those measures into some combined language across the board for those ones that were all related or had very similar measures, but we're using the exact language now and have been able to do that successfully. There are, still some measures, as you recall, that are in the Maryland strategic plan, the Maryland Transform strategic plan, that are in the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan that the AIB created, that are there's no real match from one plan to the other. So we still have quite a few measures for both sides, on both sides of the aisle, that there wasn't a direct alignment with, and that we'll be, tracking and measuring separately. So we haven't touched on those, but otherwise the ones where we know that there's direct alignment, we've been able to combine the language and have draft combined measures.
Great.
So that's been great. Yeah.
It's hard work to do.
It is.
It's great that everybody had buy-in doing that process.
Yeah.
It is hard work, and I do want to, express our appreciation to the superintendent and MSDE staff who've been really leaning in on this work now, and I think we're making really good progress. Any other questions? I keep waiting for Member Manco to ask a question so I can address him as Dr. Manco.
Did he just complete his, did you complete your PhD, Joe?
I did.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Bravo.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, congratulations.
Yeah.
All right, Britt will take over from here.
Okay, sure will. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So we're still in the
Executive Director report.
executive directors, yes, report. Please.
So the next item is the legislative update, which kind of overlaps with the budget update. I'm going to be working sort of through the documents that we've provided to members and also the public. There's a legislative update document and a budget update document. We could share the screen if you'd like, but it is a document. It's not a slide deck, so I'm not sure if that's really helpful. But if it is,
Rachel, can you kind of scroll through as you talk? It would be helpful. So
okay,
we can see what
absolutely.
you're actually speaking on to.
Absolutely. Let me, can I share my screen or can someone else share their screen?
You'll have to
I just made it so anyone can share.
So you can share it.
All right.
Actually, then you
Yep.
can control the flow.
Yep. I'm trying. It's not letting me. There we go. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
good.
All right. So this is so session ended last Monday at midnight for anyone who was counting. And it was a very, very busy session. They all are, but this one was this was a lot this year. And so the General Assembly passed over 1,000 bills that will be going to the governor for his signature. And so what we've done is we've highlighted the bills that pass that relate or affect the blueprint. And then we also do have a list of bills that did not pass. We did not include that in this document, but it is a separate document that is available if you would like to see it. Those bills often have a way of coming back in the future, which is why we track those also. So the first bill I want to talk about is what's considered the AIB's bill, or the Blueprint Departmental Bill. That was House Bill 1426. There was also a cross-file, Senate Bill 1102, that initially passed out of the Senate, but ultimately the House and the Senate just agreed on just amending one bill for the final version. So that is House Bill 1426. This is the bill that the AIB had requested with MSDE support that included the provisions that were identified in the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan update process, as well as some additional provisions. One of the additional provisions that was added by amendment at the request of MSDE and AIB is this provision related to dual enrollment and post-CCR pathways. And so the AIB and MSDE, in recognition of the fact that the funding for college and career readiness in the upcoming fiscal year 2025 budget is based on the interim CCR standard, but the new CCR standard was adopted by the state board earlier this year. And as part of that adoption, they specifically said that the districts need to recognize the new CCR standard, students that meet the new CCR standard in this upcoming fall. So that has created a misalignment between the funding that is provided to support the dual enrollment through the post-CCR pathway and the number of students that would be eligible to dual enroll. Of course, dual enrollment and AP as advanced placement courses that we talked about before, as well as CTE and career pathways, are a critical element of the blueprint. And under the blueprint current law, ultimately, every student that is college and career ready has the opportunity to pursue these post-CCR pathways at no cost, with giving students the real possibility of earning up to an associate's degree or the equivalent of 60 credits while they're still in high school. So that is something that is a critical element of the blueprint. And in recognition, though, of the timing of the CCR standard and the timing of the way the funding flows through the funding formula, we wanted to make sure a couple things, that there was some sort of minimum number of dual enrollment courses that students, regardless of what district they are in, have the opportunity to enroll in, because due to the financial considerations, school systems are feeling the pinch, and some of them were moving to limit the number of dual enrollment courses that students can take. And so the AIB and MSD wanted to ensure that there was some sort of standardization across the state of a minimum number of dual enrollment courses that all college and career ready students would have the opportunity to take. But at the same time, wanting to ensure that as many students as possible have the ability to dual enroll by sort of trying to limit sort of super users, shall we say, of dual enrollment so that more students have the ability to dual enroll in some courses rather than a smaller number of students having the ability to dual enroll in many courses. So there is a provision in House Bill 1426 that provides MSDE and the AIB with the authority to set a limit on the number and types of courses that students may dual enroll in. During this transition period in fiscal 25 through 27, as we sort of move, as the funding catches up with the new CCR standard definition. So that's one provision that is new in the bill that was not in the bill as introduced. There's also this the National Board certification incentive, the fee payment for non-classroom teachers that was requested by the AIB was approved in the bill. Also providing for multi-year funding for Judy and Patty centers with a first year of funding that is sort of a planning year was approved. Another provision related to full day pre-K that was requested was approved related to giving the Departments of Social Services and Health the authority to share contact information with school systems for eligible students and their families. There's also provision that was requested during session by MSDE and AIB, and this relates to the kindergarten readiness assessment. As you may recall, the superintendent announced that the current version of the KRA would be no longer used by the state of Maryland based on the findings of a bias report. And so MSD is in the process of doing an emergency procurement for a new KRA for Maryland. And so what this provision in the bill does is it really just sets aside the timeline in current law that requires the KRA to be administered by October 10th of each year, and that the results of the KRA are available 45 days later, because given that a new procurement needs to occur and then the training of teachers to administer the KRA, the concern was that the timeline wouldn't be able to be met this year. So that provision was approved by the General Assembly. There is also related to the pre-K expansion grant fund. There are sort of two pieces here. The first piece related to the high quality staffing requirements. This was in the bill as introduced. So this is what the AIB had requested. And this has to do with aligning the timeline for meeting the high quality staffing requirements across the full day pre-K formula and the pre-K expansion grant. So making sure that the expansion grant grantees have that additional time for their teachers and teaching assistants to meet the high quality staffing requirement. There are some other changes related to that high quality staffing requirement in another bill, House Bill 1441, that I'm going to get to in a minute. But a provision from that bill, House Bill 1441, was added to House Bill 1426. And what that does is it actually extends the life of the pre-K expansion grant fund for 4 more years. This is excellent because the pre-K expansion grant is really the mechanism that is providing startup funding for new full day pre-K slots. And so under current law, the pre-K expansion grant, this would be the last year of providing those grants. And now fiscal 29 will be the last year for those grants. So that is something that the AIB and MSDE both supported very strongly in the bill. And then the provision that AIB had and CTE committee had requested around report deadlines was adopted. The provision that was originally in House Bill 1426 related to adjusting the timeline for the interim evaluation of the blueprint, it was adopted, but it was moved from this bill to the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act. So it was adopted, and so the interim evaluation was moved from under current law, it was to be done this fall. Under the amendments to the law, it will be due in December of 2026. And then the AIB's recommendations will be due in January of 2027. So of course, all of these provisions that I'm talking about are subject to the governor's, the bill taking effect, the governor signing, or at least.
Can I just get clarification on that? So the
Yes.
report is due December 2026, and we're going to have our recommendations the next month.
So the way it works in the statute now is it's like a month apart. So the consultant submits their report. Currently it's October, and then October 15th, I think, or 30th, and then December 1st of the same year. So it's about a month between when the consultant has to submit their final evaluation, and then the AIB has about a month to develop and finalize its recommendations that would go to the Governor and General Assembly. So they just moved it to cross between the December of 2026 and January of 2027. Keep in mind, yes, that is a very short timeline. The AIB, we will be meeting regularly with the evaluator, and we will as part of the RFP, which we will now be very much focused on putting out the RFP for this evaluation. There will be a draft. There will be a requirement that they submit a draft final report prior to the final report. So we will, I don't know what that timeline will be, but there will be a draft report that we will receive in advance of the final report. So we will have more than 1 month to to develop recommendations.
Madam Director,
Yeah.
Is there some set criteria upon which they will do the evaluation?
There are provisions in the law that need to be covered. And then there could be additional criteria that the AIB includes in the RFP.
I see. And we will prepare the RFP. Is that correct?
Correct.
We could put criteria in the RFP. That's really what I was.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, good. That's good.
Yes.
Because I think we don't want to just leave it to sort of their general impressions. We want to have some very specific things we want assessed. So that's good. Thank you.
Yes, and on that point, I will also just let you know that as part of the budget, we had requested a deficiency appropriation of $1 million to be able to conduct the interim evaluation and put it out to bid, and we did receive that money in the budget.
That's great. Thank you.
We did receive those funds in the final approved budget. Okay, so that pretty much covers House Bill 1426, which is like the main piece of legislation that we had worked on. Before I move on to some of the other policy bills, I would like to talk about the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act and also the budget. But specifically what's known as the BRFA has a number of policy provisions in it that affect the blueprint and specifically affect pre-kindergarten. But the first item that was included in the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act has to do with that interim evaluation that we just discussed. So essentially that identical language was included in that was in House Bill 1426 is now in the BRFA. But then they did make a number of changes to the full day pre-kindergarten formula. And there's also a budget summary document, but I'm just going to stick with this document because I don't want to flip back and forth between documents right now. So under current law, beginning in fiscal 2025, students who are referred to as tier 2 students, meaning that their family income falls between 300 and 600% of poverty, were eligible to be funded starting in this upcoming year. So prior to fiscal 25, only tier 1 students, who are students whose family income is up to 300% of poverty, are being funded because they are the priority for enrollment. That's who we want to serve first in full day pre-kindergarten, our lowest income students. So they are referred to as tier 1 students. Beginning in fiscal 25, tier 2 students were eligible under current law to be funded. The General Assembly, however, delayed that by a year. And so tier 2 students will not be funded for enrollment this fall. They are still able to apply to enroll. Districts have enrolled tier 2 and tier 3 students. Several of our districts have what's called universal pre-K, and they enroll all 4-year-olds regardless of income. And that they can still do that. They just will not receive any funding, state funding for those tier 2 students. So that's the first thing that was done. And then the General Assembly actually phased up. So in fiscal 26, tier 2 students up to 360% of poverty will be funded, and then it goes up to 600% in fiscal 27. That does result in some savings to the state of about $7 million and to the Blueprint Fund, because those tier 2 students will not be funded. But from a policy perspective, it also keeps the focus on tier 1 students, our lowest students that we want to make sure we're serving. Under the Blueprint, the goal is that all tier 1 students are served by fiscal 26. So it supports that goal. But it also, or I should say, the General Assembly also, you may recall last session, the AIB had supported a bill that provided funding for students from families where English is not the primary spoken language, and students with disabilities who were above that 300% threshold. We supported including them in tier 1, so they received funding, because under the Blueprint law, in addition to the lowest income students of up to 300% of poverty, students with disabilities and students from families where English is not the primary language are also a priority for enrollment. So that provision was adopted last year. It's being implemented this year. The General Assembly extended that for a second year. So even though tier 2 students will not be funded in fiscal 25, the General Assembly extended the provision that does allow funding. So LEAs will receive funding for tier 2 students who are students with disabilities or from families where English is not the primary language spoken. So that's another policy change that the legislature, that has fiscal implications, that was included in the BRFA. And then a third provision in the BRFA.
Rachel, real quickly, if a county wants to fund tier 2 students, they can do that?
Absolutely.
They just won't get any state support for it.
Correct.
Can they, if they do that, do they have to fund them at both the public and private providers?
So, LEAs can enter into and are required to enter into an MOU with private providers in their county that are participating in the full day
Right.
program. And they can certainly, as part of that MOU, enroll tier 2 students.
I see. But they could choose to only fund tier 2 students at public. Is that right? If they didn't have such an MOU?
So whether tier 2 students are enrolled or not is up to the LEA, because they are running the full day.
Yeah. My question really is, can they differentiate between public and private providers in making that decision?
If
Do you understand my question?
I think what you might be asking, and so let me, so as one of the impacts of the General Assembly not funding tier 2 students in the upcoming year is that the sliding scale that the MSD was required to develop, that was adopted,
won't be in place.
Won't be in place.
Right.
And there were concerns that the districts have raised around whether they would be required to collect the family share. That is, so the sliding scale set so there's a state share, there's a local share, and then for above 300% of poverty, there is a sliding scale for what's called the family share.
Right.
And the family share, there was some concern in the districts around whether they were required to collect the family share.
Right.
And whether they could differentiate between collecting the family share of tier 2 students who are enrolled in a public school versus with a private. Is that your question?
Well, no, but I guess, and maybe I should ask you this offline because it's not a major policy question. I wondered if a county, if an LEA decides to enroll tier 2 students in preschool, so they're subsidizing the cost of that.
Mm-hmm.
What would happen if a private school wanted to enroll, private provider wanted to enroll a tier 2 student?
Well, I don't think they would, because there wouldn't be state funding.
Okay, so there's no actual dollar allocation from the LEA. They're just absorbing the cost in the school. So if the analogy would be the private provider could do the same thing if they wanted to.
Yes, I think.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
That's probably right. Which from a business model, they would not.
Would not do. Agreed.
I stand to be corrected, but I believe that all of our districts that have universal pre-K are providing that in their public schools. I don't think that they are relying on private providers right now. Okay. So the last thing related to pre-K, and I shouldn't say the last thing because there's another whole bill that deals with pre-K, but in the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, the last thing has to do with the per pupil funding, the phase-in of the per pupil funding. Under current law, for many blueprint programs, the per pupil amount phases up over time to get to the full funding under the blueprint. For most programs, it's fiscal 2030. For the foundation program, it's actually fiscal 2033. So for pre-K, the formula phases up to the full amount of what we call the cost of quality, which is it's a calculation that national organization created to provide enough resources to support high quality programming by fiscal 30. And it's to be specific, it's $19,956 in fiscal 2030. The legislature decided to accelerate the phase in to that amount so that the full amount will now be provided beginning in fiscal 27 rather than fiscal 2030. That from a policy perspective goes a long way to support our mixed delivery full day pre-K program that is envisioned by the blueprint, because one of the big challenges for private providers is that the per pupil formula amount, because it's not at its full strength, is not, as they argue, it's not providing enough resources for them to move into the publicly funded system. So they're not able to participate in the publicly funded system because the formula does not provide enough funding to make it a viable business model. So hopefully, as we put all of these changes together, and obviously there are a lot of changes in pre-K coming out of this session. And so we have been talking with MSDE, with the private provider networks and stakeholders, and we have a lot to kind of work our way through and think our way through. But in whole, it's overall the changes, support implementation of the mixed delivery system that the blueprint envisions. And so I think as we move forward, the question is, does it work? Can we implement it? So that will be our next challenge. There are other changes related to pre-K that I'm just going to hold on for the moment, so we can stay with the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act. The other big thing in the BRFA related to the blueprint is that the General Assembly adopted several revenue provisions related to tobacco products that provide additional funding to the Blueprint Fund. And as a result of those actions, and there is also a table that I will show you when we get to the budget document, but as a result of those actions, as well as some revenue transfers and some of the back and forth with the other changes related to spending, the Blueprint Fund, the Department of Legislative Services now projects that the Blueprint Fund covers the blueprint expenditures through fiscal year 2027. So at the beginning of session, the Blueprint Fund was projected to run a deficit in fiscal 27. And now there's enough revenue based on projections to make it through fiscal year 2027. And I will show you a chart with that information just in a few minutes, but those are provisions that are in the BRFA. And then there are also some changes, some impacts in the budget that I'm going to hold on that until we move to the other document. So then there are a number of other bills that we track throughout session that have an impact on the AIB or the blueprint. And I don't want to discuss all of them because it would take a long time. But I'm happy to answer questions, but I do just want to focus on a couple that have more significant impacts and that the AIB worked on. So there are a couple of bills related to community schools, House Bill 200 and Senate Bill 161. At a certain point, the bills were potentially we're going to have a larger impact than the bills that did pass. but the bottom line is that the MSD Director of Community Schools is charged with creating a common needs assessment for community schools for new community schools to engage in a needs and asset assessment, and then also to create what's called an evaluation form. And under the amendments to the community schools law, each year beginning not in 2024 but in 2025, every year community school needs to submit what's called an evaluation to the AIB and MSDE. So they have to submit this annually, and it includes reporting on specific wraparound services that they provided to students and families. Some of it includes data, and also the use of funds in the prior year. So each year they will submit that to AIB and MSDE, and then AIB and MSDE are just required to make those reports public. And then separately, by December 1st of this year, the AIB and MSDE have to submit a joint report to the General Assembly on possible methods to ensure that the concentration of poverty grant funds are used appropriately and effectively. So that is a one-time report that AIB and MSDE have to submit by December 1st. There's a second bill that originally that has to do with community schools, and this has to do with providing rental assistance for families who need it, whose students attend a community school. That bill did pass, and there were some provisions that initially MSDE was administering the program, but that was adjusted to have the Department of Housing and Community Development administer it in consultation with MSDE. Originally, the community schools coordinators were actually going to be providing the rental assistance to the students and their families. And the school systems were particularly concerned that that would be that would be overly burdensome to the community school coordinators in those schools. And so the bill utilizes both the director of community schools and MSDE and the community school coordinators sort of as a way of providing the information to families about the availability of the rental assistance, but not actually facilitating the actual payments. So those are two bills related to technical assistance. And please, if anyone has questions, I can't see everyone or hands, so please feel free to just jump in if you have a question. There are a number of bills here, all of them important, but the next one I want to focus on is House Bill 945 and Senate Bill 771. This is a bill that has to do with initial teacher certification and the requirements for initial teacher certification. This is a bill that was introduced early in session, and that the AIB and MSDE worked with the sponsor and the stakeholders to develop amendments that were agreed upon by everyone. Those amendments, which we talked about at an earlier meeting, but I'm happy to provide more detail. But those amendments, those consensus amendments, were adopted by both the House and the Senate, excuse me, and are contained in both bills. So the bills are identical as passed by the Senate and the House. And essentially what they do is they provide for multiple measures and multiple pathways for teachers to receive their initial certification from the state, particularly for conditional teachers who are essentially teachers who are in our classrooms teaching and have not been fully certified yet. And so this provides for another pathway that allows them to participate in an induction program. So while they are teaching, they would also be satisfying requirements that would, at the end of the induction program of up to 3 years, they would be able to receive their initial teacher certification. And so as a result of that, under the blueprint, there is a requirement beginning July 1, 2025, that all in-state students pass a portfolio, a nationally recognized portfolio-based assessment of teaching ability in order as a requirement for graduation. That was repealed because that is still one pathway to certification, but there are these other pathways, which include this induction program that also has to include a portfolio component. And then the other change, initially as introduced, the bill included Maryland participating in the Interstate Teacher Compact. That provision was the AIB and MSTE ultimately supported that provision, but it was removed from the bill by the General Assembly. The next bill, just very briefly, House Bill 1082. This was a provision. This was a bill that was also introduced last year that did not pass last year, but it passed this year. That permanently under current law, the blueprint coordinators were required through fiscal 25. House Bill 1082 makes the blueprint coordinators a permanent position, a requirement indefinitely, and it provides state and local funding to support that required position, $150,000 per year for that position for each LEA. So that is now a mandated requirement in the budget.
Hey, Rachel, when they say indefinitely, this is concluding in 2032, or this goes beyond that?
It goes beyond that.
Okay.
Because the blueprint is permanent. The AIB is not permanent, but the blueprint is permanent. Then there are a number of other bills. The Grow Your Own Educators Grant Program did pass, but without a mandated appropriation. House Bill 1287 is a bill that originally did not relate to the blueprint, but in its final form, it does relate to the blueprint. And this makes changes to the school leadership training program that is required as part of the blueprint. That is something that AIB and MST have been talking about in terms of moving forward with that leadership training. Hopefully starting definitely starting in fiscal 25, but hopefully starting over the summer. But there's an additional, essentially, the bill now it made some tweaks to the training requirements. The main change is that it specifically requires every local superintendent as well as the state superintendent to participate in the training. It also requires the chair and vice chair of the state board and the AIB, as well as each county board of education, to participate in the training program. So it makes some small changes to the actual training, but the main change is that certain positions are required to participate in the training. Under the current law, it's a 12 to 24 month training program. The legislation changes it to a 12-month program. So it's a 12-month training program that's required for certain leaders. The other bill I wanted to focus on is House Bill 1441. And this is the pre-K bill that I was referring to earlier that makes a number of changes to the law in addition to those that we've already talked about. And two main provisions. There are changes to the high quality staffing requirement for teachers and teaching assistants for pre-K. And there is the creation of a career ladder for private providers that will provide a pathway from early childhood care up through pre-K, 4-year-old pre-K for teaching and teaching assistants and other staff in early childhood. The bill also adjusts the percentage of slots that are required to be in private providers. Under current law, the 50% of slots are required to be with private providers by fiscal year 27. And already we have been pretty far behind reaching that target. The bill adjusts that target so that it kind of rebases it so that we start at 10% in fiscal 25 and then ramp up to the 50% in 10%, 10 percentage point increments. So it sets a more realistic goal, or not even a goal, requirement for public and private provider participation in the public pre-K program. There are a number of other changes in the law, and I think that we will definitely be spending more time talking about all the different changes to pre-K and how it impacted the blueprint at a future meeting. But happy to answer specific question, or at least take the—
What is, Rachel, do it real quickly, what is the percentage, do we know, of pre-K schools in private providers at present?
There are, I'm probably not gonna, I think there are 5 or 6 districts that have about 10%.
So
And
it's still pretty low.
more, 10% or more, would be the way to put it. So the vast majority of districts are below 10%.
Okay. So this is a challenge.
It's a big challenge.
Yeah.
But all these changes taken together
Will help, yes, no question.
get us to a place where, you know, hopefully it's possible.
Right.
Dr. Manka.
So first off, hats off to you and the team. I mean, this is just like a incredible amount of work. And just the level of depth and knowledge that you have about all these various bills is just, you know, I mean, it's really amazing. I guess the question is, how does this exist outside of your own brains? Like, this summary document will be posted someplace for the public to digest, and then I guess how do these changes get reflected in our work moving forward? Is it that these get absorbed into the next iteration of the comprehensive plan? Is it our responsibility to get information out both to the public, but then also to the I mean, I'm assuming the agencies have been tracking this pretty well. I don't know, you know, the LEAs. I mean, there's just so much information here and so many different ins and outs of all these different bills. And I know each of the LEAs have their own staff that are working on this, but it does seem like there should be some way to get information out to the public more generally, and then also to the LEAs about, like, these are changes that have come from this latest, you know, this latest session that impact how the blueprint will be implemented.
Well, thank you, and thanks for that question. So yes, this document already is posted for the public. But it is a lot, so totally appreciate that. The there's something called the 90-day report or the 90-day report that the Department of Legislative Services uh, publishes, which is a summary of all the legislation that passed the General Assembly, not just education related. But that is another resource that we could link to on our website. Both the Public School Superintendents Association of Maryland and the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, they both track all of the education legislation on behalf of the 24 school systems and provide them with updates during session and then the wrap up like what we're doing here. And so it is a lot to process, but I think the LEAs all have all of this information at this point. In terms of what we do with it, yes. So all of these changes will be incorporated in the next update to the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan. And it may lead us to change some of it may change other things related to what are some of the barriers to implementation, maybe hopefully have been addressed by some of these changes. There might be other challenges that have been created as a result. I mean, there are some related to some of the interactions between the budget and the policy changes that we're going to need to address. The other thing specifically around early childhood is MSDE and AIB. You may recall we submitted the Joint Chairman's Report in December that we had worked on around pre-K, and as part of that, we committed to working with stakeholders and convening various stakeholders to continue the work and to work on implementing the changes that we were talking about. Many of those changes are contained in these various bills and provisions. And so we had already been talking with MSDE about the timing of a convening, and we decided to wait until after session ended so that we could really focus the convening on sort of updating everybody on what changed during session and sort of developing a game plan for implementation moving forward. I don't believe we've set a date for that yet, but I know we're looking at we want to get past the date when the governor takes action on the bills to just to be safe that they actually become law. And then we're going to hold a convening for early childhood stakeholders to really dig into what happened during session and then what the next steps are.
Hey, Rachel?
Yes.
Will there now be, if someone wanted to print the blueprint for Maryland's future, will there now be a bill that incorporates all these changes? Or do you happen to have to know that in such and such a year something was amended? And I mean, will there be a kind of a current blueprint for Maryland's future bill?
So I mean this seriously. Thank you for asking that question because this was very top of mind for quite a while, and it has not been as top of mind recently. So we at the staff level, we had been talking about so the short answer to your question is no. There's no one place where everything that's considered part of the blueprint for Maryland's future and all the updated changes to it from the in terms of the law exist. You have to go to you have to know which section of the law is part of the blueprint, and then you have to go to each section. And also it takes time for those sections of law to be updated. There's a whole process after each session where there's the Mickey company, actually there's a company that literally goes and makes the formal official changes to the law, to the statute based on the laws that passed. So we had previously been working on trying to come up with some either hard copy or digital kind of master blueprint law
Right.
document. And so we're gonna put that back on the top of the list.
Well, I'm glad to hear. I know that's going to be a lot of work, but it does seem to me that it's something worth doing. There ought to be one place someone can go to and find the actual current blueprint bill. So
Yeah.
thank you for considering that.
No, absolutely. Yeah. The last thing I wanted to just focus on, because it requires something of AIB, is Senate Bill 482. This is the Governor's Office for Children bill that was an administration bill that codifies some of the changes that the governor announced through executive order earlier in the year, or actually last year, sort of reopening the Governor's Office for Children, and then also creating a grant program called the Enough Grant that is supporting the governor's goal of ending childhood poverty by providing place-based support in specific neighborhoods around the state. Through the legislative process, there were a number of changes that were made to that bill, including that the neighborhood, you may recall the neighborhood indicators of poverty report that MSDE was required to provide, and the discussion around that. The General Assembly has now tasked the Governor's Office for Children with reviewing and the potential methodologies and submitting a report on neighborhood indicators of poverty by October of 2025. And they are also required to submit that to MSDE and AIB. And then the AIB is required to make a recommendation on whether there should be an updated methodology for calculating compensatory education grants. So essentially, whether the new methodology should be included in the funding formula. So that is not until 2025. So not this year, but next year. So we have a little time. The special secretary of the Governor's Office for Children has already reached out. We have spoken several times previously, but specifically around this new requirement to work with AIB and MSDE as they do this work. So there are other bills in this document that everyone's welcome to read, and I'm happy to answer questions about other bills, but I would like to move to the budget if there are no specific questions right now. Okay.
I think you can move on. Yeah.
I'm going to stop sharing so that I can move to the other document and reshare. Can everyone see that? Okay, great. Okay, so this is just a very high level summary of the changes that were made in the budget and the BRFA by the General Assembly. And so the first thing I want to focus on is, I think this chart is helpful to see the changes in revenues that were made by the General Assembly that are dedicated to the Blueprint Fund. And so you can see that beginning in fiscal 25, there's actually an additional about $91 million that will go into the Blueprint Fund related to tobacco tax revenues. And then in addition, there's $40 million that the General Assembly is transferring from a fund that is being repealed into the Blueprint Fund. So in total, 131.4 million of additional revenues are going into the Blueprint Fund in fiscal 25. And then you can see in 26 and 27, that amount increases to over 150 million each year. And because there is some diversion of tobacco revenues to the Blueprint Fund in addition to the new revenues. And then beginning in fiscal 28, it sort of levels off to, around, a little more than $70 million in new revenues that would be going into the Blueprint Fund each year.
So Rachel, I just want to make what I think is an important point, that all of these funds are what we would call special funds.
Yes.
They do not impact the general fund of the state of Maryland.
Correct.
I hear, in fact, I heard it from some colleagues in higher education the other day, that the Blueprint is resulting in cuts to the university's budget. And I corrected them immediately that it is not, because the Blueprint funding is coming from special funds and doesn't impact the general fund. And I just think it's important for the public to understand that as well. And we read editorials and other things in the paper that are just misguided because they don't understand how the funding actually is working.
Correct. The Blueprint Fund, there's something called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund. It is a special fund that contains dedicated revenues for the Blueprint, which includes various types of gaming revenues.
Right.
And as well as sales tax revenues, online new revenues attributable to online sales. And then now this additional revenue related to tobacco products.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the revenue situation. On the budget side, I already talked about the tier 2 children not being funded in fiscal 25, which is a reduction of about $7.2 million in the budget, in the special fund budget, to Dr. Kerwin's point. All of these are special fund revenues, not general fund revenues. The General Assembly also reduced one time the funding for the Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports. That was reduced by $70 million. It is a one-time reduction. My understanding is based on the timing of when the consortium would be able to make grants. This would not affect the actual grants to be made. Excuse me. And then below that are additions to the budget. And so the General Assembly does have the ability, the authority to add to the budget now. And again, these items are all special fund revenues related to, so there was a reduction related to the tier 2 children for full day pre-K. There was an increase of 9.2 million to support additional full day pre-K slots. Essentially, the slots that are being funded by the pre-K expansion grant currently are now being added to the budget under the funding formula. So we're going to support those kids through the funding formula, which will then free up the pre-K expansion grant for new slots. And then in terms of the AIB's budget, we did receive an additional $1.1 million for technical assistance in fiscal 25, which brings the total amount combined with the 1.9 million that we had reserved from our fiscal 24 budget. So we will have a total of $3 million to support the phase 2 technical assistance. And then we also received funding for office space and something that we did not request, but certainly appreciate given how much was involved with this current session. A new position for a government affairs position, a legislative liaison. So that will be an additional position that we will be recruiting for. And then there's also some additional funds, just so you're aware of it, $3 million that is provided for school resource officers in schools, in high schools. And there's an additional $3 million that was provided for the Child Care Career Professional Development Fund. This is really critical to support the pathway for our existing teachers and teaching assistants to upskill so that they meet the high quality staffing requirements. This fund helps support that, and it originally did not receive any funding in the budget. And then we talked about the blueprint coordinators, the mandated funding to support those positions. $2 million was added to the budget for fiscal 25. And then moving forward, the governor will include it in the budget each year. And then there, actually, this is unrelated to the blueprint, but there were grants provided for some transportation projects in Baltimore County and Montgomery County. And that's actually general funds, I believe, not special funds. And then this other provision, I just wanted to make you aware of. It's sort of tangential to the blueprint, but clearly related because the Child Care Scholarship Program supports children from 0 to 3 in childcare. And a couple things. There was a shortfall in funding for the scholarship program that was addressed during session so that the child care scholarship is fully funded. And then there's also in addition, the BRFA did not allow an increase in parent payment, or what's called co-payment, like in insurance. Co-payment levels are not cannot be increased after January 1st. And there is also a process that does not, MSDE cannot freeze enrollment in childcare scholarship without meeting certain very specific requirements. So all that is to say that between what the administration had done and then what the General Assembly has done, they provided additional resources to support childcare so that families that qualify will be able to access it. So that is very good news for the blueprint. And I think that covers the budget update. Are there any questions? I don't see.
Well, Rachel, before we move on, excuse me, Dr. Manco has already said it, but we just need to repeat again what a phenomenal job you did this session. It was, I've known you for quite a few years now. I've been dazzled by what you can do, but you know, this was really very, very impressive. I know, and I also want to note how impressive the collaboration with MSDE was. I mean, we talked issues through, so there was never, as far as I know, any daylight between what we were advocating happen in the General Assembly, and that was very impressive as well. I'm very thankful that the General Assembly recognized that you need some additional support. So having a government relations person will be very helpful. I mean, it'll still fall on your shoulders, but you'll have some staff support in this area that I think will be very helpful. But I see all my colleagues nodding our vote of thanks and appreciation for the excellent work you and your staff did.
Thank you. And I did want to say it's a team effort.
I know.
Internal within AIB, between the policy analysts and really everyone. I mean, almost pretty much everyone had some hand in supporting the session, as well as working with the team at MSDE, the state superintendent and the state board members, as well as leadership, as well as AIB. And you all, as you kind of jumped in as different bills were focused on and we needed to discuss potential amendments. I really appreciate all of your willingness to be part of that process. And I think overall it was a very successful session.
Yes, I think we all agree.
Wonderful. Okay.
Okay, so I think we're ready for the next item on the agenda.
Yes. So I think we can actually move on to on the staffing update. I just have one update at the moment, which is the position for the data fiscal research analyst. That position closed, and so we're in the process of evaluating the applications that were received, and we will sort of proceed through the process of conducting interviews, and hopefully we will be able to bring someone excellent on board as soon as possible. We are we're gonna complete that effort before we work on posting any other positions. So but we will continue to work towards fully staffing all of our positions as soon as we can. And then if there are any questions about that, we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the state agency blueprint implementation plans. And for that, I will just provide sort of a brief overview and then ask Emma to go through specifically the criteria for success. But essentially, as we discussed earlier, when we were talking about the LEA blueprint implementation plans, we also have several state agencies that submitted blueprint implementation plans last year and will be required to submit them again this June, by June 15th. And last year we did not provide a template for the state agency plan. So we had that template that we used for the LEAs, but we didn't have a similar template for the state agency plans. And as a result of the process of reviewing last year's plans, as well as going through the process for the LEAs, where we sort of moved from a really detailed template to more of a what we call a guide. At AIB staff, we felt like we needed to develop a guide for each of the state agency plans as well, so that we were really being more clear about what we would like information about and what we're asking the state agencies to do. And so we've been doing that work over the past however many months. And as Emma said earlier, we've been meeting with each of the state agencies that will be submitting another plan in June, both to kind of get an update on what they've been doing since their plans were 2023 plans were submitted, but then also to give them to talk more about what kinds of information and strategies we would be looking for in their 24 plans. And so as a result of that, we also realized that the criteria for success that we used for the 2023 plans actually was embedded in the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan, and it was fairly general. and that we needed more specific criteria for success for those state plans as well. And so that is why we are bringing you today for your consideration and approval, hopefully, the criteria for success that would be used as we are reviewing the state agency plans and as we bring to you a recommendation of approval to approve or not approve the state agency plans. So with that, Emma, I will turn it over to you. And would you like to share your screen, or I could share my screen if you would prefer?
I don't think oh, actually, I do have sharing capability. So let me, Rachel, would you mind sharing your screen? I'm sorry.
Do not mind. I'm all set up for it. Okay.
So as Rachel mentioned, or Executive Director Heiss mentioned, sorry, the criteria for success for this year are associated or aligned with the questions that we're asking in state agency guides. So you do have these criteria for success that will be applied to each response to each question that are in the state agency guides. So it's not just these criteria for success and nothing else that will be provided to the state agencies. They will also be getting a guide that the criteria for success will be used to evaluate the success of that response. So I can just go through here and discuss each one. They're obviously up on the screen, they're available in the agenda, and then take any questions that you may have about these. But in general, we wanted to ensure that the responses, yes, report on and discuss the work that has been done in fiscal year 2024, specifically since their last implementation plan guide, but also that it looks at, moving forward. What is the agency doing to build on the work that has been done, and to use that as something that will help to inform future implementation plans for the fiscal years 2025 through 27. So we'll go ahead and start with the first criteria, which is that the response demonstrates a strong understanding of the status of blueprint implementation. And as I said, will help to inform future plans for how they will effectively implement the blueprint with fidelity. So thinking about where the agency is relative, or where the state is relative to what the expected outcome is for blueprint implementation, we want to know the response should ensure that understanding is demonstrated. The response should also demonstrate that the agency is embedding equity and cultural responsiveness and fulfilling their blueprint implementation requirements and responsibilities to ensure that all students receive the resources and support they need to be successful. And as I said earlier, that the responses focus on work that has been done or will be done in the implementation period from this current fiscal year 2024 through 2027. And that's what this phase 2 of the first phase of implementation is looking at. So if you recall, last year's plans were looking at work that was done in fiscal years 22 through 23. This year's plans are fiscal years 24 through 27. I'm sorry, 22 through 24, and then this year's plans are 25 through 27. The response should also provide implementation timelines. We, just again, looking at last year's plans, we thought that this would be a helpful criterion to include because as we are looking at activities, we certainly do want to confirm that everything is implemented by statutory deadlines, or we want to know when anticipated when the anticipated date of completion is for any of these activities and initiatives. We included requirements for key milestones as well. For any initiatives or activities that are underway or currently or will be underway in terms of blueprint implementation. So going beyond just this is what we know we're going to have this is when the implementation activity will be done, but here are some milestones that we're looking at along the way and ensuring that that's embedded in the response as well. We also want to ensure that the response defines roles and responsibilities of both the state agency that is submitting the response, but also the other agencies that are contributing to this particular implementation activity or task. Of course, and we know that this is already happening, but this requires some collaboration with other agencies to ensure that their responses complement each other. And you'll see with the final state agency guides that that collaborative work is really embedded in the guides, and that we're ensuring that this is reflected as part of the responses that are submitted this year. When applicable, not always, this won't always be the case that an artifact has to be submitted, but we really want to ensure that artifacts and links that are submitted are kind of complementing the work or helping to enhance it versus taking the place of a narrative response that describes the work and activities that will be done to implement the blueprint. So we want to, and this is something that the questions really, again, and the guides will emphasize, but we want to get an understanding of the status of work to be done. And so the artifacts should serve as additional resources to help detail those responses and to help make things clearer, but they shouldn't take the place of the narrative response. The response should also identify any challenges to implementation challenges as needed, but it should also propose innovative solutions to address those challenges within the agency's scope of work and budget. And then finally, we want to ensure that the response addresses all components of the prompt clearly, concisely, and comprehensively. So, we ask for the details that we ask for because we want to know them, and we know that they're critical components to blueprint implementation. And we know that this is something all agencies strove to do last year as well, to provide as much detail as possible, but we just wanted to have a criterion here that reflects that. And it's also explicitly part of the LEA Blueprint Implementation Plan Guide that we developed in collaboration with MSDE. So similarly, we also want to ensure that the responses we're receiving are clear, concise, and comprehensive. So I'll go ahead and pause here if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, first of all, I'm very pleased we're doing this. I think it's really important to have the kind of clear statement, and I for one think you've hit on very important, most of the important items. I do have one question, and it concerns something, Rachel, that you and I, others have discussed. There is a concern that, and in fact, we have consultants now working with LEAs to be more strategic in the use of their resources. That is to say, it was never intended that blueprint funding was on top of everything that LEAs would normally get in a budget allocation. That there had to be they had to be doing things differently, so there had to be some adjustments in funding in order to fully support, basically stop doing things that were no longer required by the blueprint and use those resources to augment the blueprint funding. And we've actually had conversations with LEAs where that isn't being done, and it's raised all sorts of questions about, is the funding adequate, et cetera, et cetera. So when I read this, that's the one thing I don't see reflected in these in these requirements. And I personally feel that we want them to have to do that. So I would like to see that included. Maybe you feel it is in the totality, but I was just wondering, wouldn't there be some value in making that more explicit?
I think that's an excellent point. I think that it is part of number 7.
That's what I wondered. 7 begins to touch on it, but I thought maybe it might be more explicitly stated.
Do you have a suggestion?
Well, unfortunately, I don't, but maybe the response reflects strategic thinking about the utilization of existing resources redirected in support of the in support of the blueprint or something like that.
I have a suggestion. If we're
Good.
comfortable with putting it in point 7, would it need to be a separate one? But Executive Director Heist, it sounded like it looked like you might have a suggestion too. Did you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
What I was gonna say, but Dr. Manko had his hand up. But
Oh, good.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I missed that. Go ahead.
That's okay, but he put it down, so I just wanted to make sure you have a suggestion before we moved on.
No, I did have a suggestion. I mean, I wonder at some point if we ask the agencies to articulate their plans for braiding their agency funds with the blueprint funds. You know, at least having them articulate their plans for how they propose or potentially will braid some of these funds. I think actually it's a good question also to look at potentially putting into the LEA template next year as a question, because I think when you ask people to identify areas where they are going through and deliberately braiding funds, it calls the question of like how you are going through and deploying your already established resources in conjunction with this new batch of resources that hopefully have some degree of synergies when they are working in conjunction.
We may actually we have talked about braiding funds with the LEAs quite extensively, particularly in early childhood. So we may actually have a question, at least in Pillar 1, that relates to that. But I think that's an excellent point. I wonder, Emmy, it sounds like you might have had a suggestion, but I wonder if we could say something about how the agency will braid funds or leverage their resources to support blueprint implementation.
I like leverage. But Emma, did you have some suggested language?
I did, but the more that I hear, the more I'm thinking that this should be a separate bullet or criterion. I was thinking that we could potentially, though, integrate this into criterion 7 by saying the response identifies challenges to implementation as needed and proposes innovative solutions, comma, including the reallocation of existing resources, comma, to address these challenges within the agency's scope of work and budget. But that might be not quite what we're looking for, just as I'm hearing, leveraging resources, braiding funds, maybe we need something that's separate to look at that. And it may not always be the case too, that an innovative solution has to be the reallocation of existing resources. So I'm not sure if that's too confining, but that was just my initial thought.
So could you make, maybe if we think of it as a separate item and just use the combination of what you said with what Dr. Manko said, that the response should indicate is it the LEA or what do we say, LEA or agency?
Agency.
Yeah, efforts to leverage existing funds in support of their plan. I don't know whether that captures it or not. Dr. Manko, does that sort of get at it?
Yeah, no, I think there's many ways that you can approach it, but I think, the crux of this is to have either the agency or I think eventually the LEAs go through and identify how already existing resources are being used to either, leverage, braid in order to make something that's larger and better than the
right
semblance of its parts.
The whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Executive Director Heist, I worry about wordsmithing in this in this means. So, is this something that needs LEA AIB approval?
It does, but it
Yeah.
does not have to be today.
Yeah, or I thought, another possibility is we've had this discussion. I think you understand what the board wants. I'm wondering if we could approve it subject to the incorporation of one additional item um, covering this issue. Or would you rather bring it back?
No, I think, how about it? Let me read what I wrote down and
Sure.
everyone is okay with that. Then I
Yeah.
think just add it and it would be part of the motion.
Good.
Ms. Detterer, is that acceptable wherever you are there?
Sure, you can amend the motion
Yeah.
before you read it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we would add a new criterion 8 that would be would say the response should indicate the agency's efforts to leverage existing funds to support blueprint implementation.
Great. That to me is that's what I was hoping. That captured what I was hoping to include. So let me just look at my colleagues to see if they're nodding more or less approval of that language. I can't see everybody.
I see smiles.
Okay, good. So are we ready for a motion with this amended criteria, this amended item?
If there are no other questions, then we could certainly entertain a motion.
Is there a motion for approval with the item as amended?
Stop sharing so we can see each other.
I'll motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you. Any discussion of this item? Seeing no hands up, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it, and so the criteria as amended have been approved.
Great. Thank you. Okay, the last item, oh shoot, the last item on the agenda, my computer has logged me out, but the last item has to do with updates to upcoming board guidance that we are in the process of developing. So we just wanted to sort of give a heads up around some of the work that we're doing with MSDE to develop joint guidance to support interpretation of the blueprint. And so we've got a couple of things that we're working on. One relates to the guidance that the AIB adopted last month around the minimum school funding requirement, or which is section 523 of the education article. As you may recall, the guidance essentially sets out fiscal 25, the upcoming year, as the baseline year for meeting the requirement, and then as indicates that the expectation is that the LEAs will make a good faith effort and that to meet the requirement, and that in the baseline year, and that that the AIB will then be looking for LEAs to make progress towards meeting the requirement beginning in fiscal 26. The superintendents have asked for more specific guidance that provides a more concrete timeline for when the requirement would be expected to be met. So
relaxed, effortless look.
MSDE and ARB are working on some potential approaches to that and getting some feedback from the superintendents before we would bring that back to the board for consideration. The other item, and it was mentioned earlier in the meeting, relates to guidance on college and career readiness in the post-CCR pathways. Specifically, we're working with MSTE to develop guidance quickly, like by next month, around dual enrollment courses and the minimum number of dual enrollment courses that all students should have, all college and career ready students should have access to. So we're also seeking feedback from the superintendents on that before we bring anything to the boards for approval. And then the third item would be administrative guidance, so not necessarily subject to board approval, but something similar to sort of FAQ information that AIB and MSD staff have been providing around blueprint implementation. This has to do with that sliding scale that supports the tier 2 students in full day pre-K and the family share. Because the General Assembly made the change that they did in the in not funding the tier 2 enrollment in fiscal 25, the guidance that has and will be shared is that the sliding scale will not be used in the fiscal 25 or in the 24-25 school year. So essentially the sliding scale is out there now, but because we're not funding tier 2 students in fiscal 25, the sliding scale is not, it's sort of, it can sort of be set to the side for this year, and then we'll continue to work with MSDE and the school systems in terms of sorting through the issue of the mechanism for collecting family share and the guardrails or guidance around family share. But for fiscal 25, for the upcoming school year, it doesn't apply. So that's the third piece that we will be providing to the districts. Any questions on any of those? I don't see any questions. All right, great. So then that concludes the public agenda for today's meeting. We do have a couple of items for executive session if we're ready to move into closed session. You're on mute, Mr. Vice Chair.
Sorry about that. Could our general counsel read our statement?
I'd be happy to. And we do, my understanding is that we do have an addition to what is on listed on the agenda as the reasoning for our closed session. We're going to add personnel, so I'll add that in today. For its last agenda item, the board expects to perform an administrative function, receive legal advice, and discuss a personnel matter pursuant to sections 3-103 and 3-305B 1 and 7 of the General Provisions article of the Annotated Code of Maryland. The motion is to close this meeting and then subsequently to adjourn from the closed session.
Thank you very much. Do I hear a motion to accept?
I accept that motion.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a motion to approve. I'm sorry. Motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We are adjourned from public session and we will adjourn from the executive session. Let's reconvene in 5 minutes. So that would be at 5:04. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.